Okay, so I'm going to go over the sample paper that I have annotated and talk about including your graphic because I know the video I attached last week is no longer available. I'm not sure what happened, but this video is going to cover including that graphic and what you need to do. All right, so let's talk about generally speaking, let's go back and refresh our knowledge of what a literature review is supposed to do. I looked at all of the outlines, and some of your outlines were actually rough drafts. And the first thing I need to say, and this is a very serious comment, but I do need to make it, is that if you use AI as an assistant, and that would be any of the AIs, ChatGPT, Claude, the Grammarly AI. Do not use it to write your paper. I can always tell. And that is not the purpose of AI. It is not appropriate, and you will be penalized for using AI to write your paper. AI is fine when you're doing brainstorming. AI is fine when you are looking for keywords, when you are maybe looking for ways of organizing things, but it's not fine to write your paper, and it's actually really noticeable by me. So do your own writing. This paper is a difficult paper the first time you write it, but once you start, if you've gone through the steps properly and worked through your research question, found your sources, read your sources with an eye to understanding what the aim of the research was, if you looked at the findings, if you looked at maybe the demographics, I am certain you saw patterns emerge as you read through those sources. That's the appropriate way of doing a literature review, not to go in with a preconceived idea on your particular research question, because it's not a research paper. It's a retrospective report on the literature, on the research, the published research on a particular research question. And you want to present it in a synthesized, in other words, your sources need to talk to each other within sections. So let's go ahead and now let's just kind of launch into this paper. So I will start with just going through page by page what your paper should look like. And as we get into those various sections of the paper, those discussions about the findings or the purpose of the study, we'll talk about that. All right. So everybody, this is APA that we're working with. Everybody's paper is going to be set up to look just like this. So you're going to have a title page. Your title page starts with the page number, the what they call the running header on the title page, and it's just a number, it's just a page number. You don't include your last name. That's MLA. So APA, again, you're going to have a title page. You're going to start paging on that title page. So everybody's title page will have a 1. You're going to drop down about 2 inches, and you will include the title of your paper, and it will be title that's, say, similar to this one, The Impact of Pet Ownership on Individuals with Autism, colon, a literature review. You probably ran across literature reviews as you were looking for your sources, and they probably had a similar feel. So your title is basically taking your research question and presenting it in a statement form. You're going to have a couple of spaces, then your name, your institution, the course name, the instructor name, and then the date that you turn it in. All right. So then you want to hit insert page break here so that you automatically go to another page. So you don't want to be hitting return, or enter, whatever. You want to make sure that you have a clear page break no matter what happens to the body of your paper. So you're going to come here and you're going to tap insert and you're going to do page break once you're done with the date. All right. So then when you're on this next page, which is going to be 2, everybody's abstract is going to be on page 2. So an abstract, if you didn't watch the videos that I included, but I assume you did, um, an abstract is just a summarized version of your paper. You write it when you're done. The purpose of the abstract is for future researchers. So let's just say you published your literature review, and the next student in that subject area needs to do a paper, and they pull your literature review up and they read your abstract. And by reading your abstract, they know exactly what each section of your paper covered. So the easiest way to do it is to boil down every section of your paper into a single statement. Um, for the introduction, you can just pull out your thesis or purpose statement. Okay, so note that abstract is centered and it's bolded. Note that it's block style. Okay, so keep that in mind that this is the one thing that's block style. And again, the first sentence can be your thesis statement, which basically summarizes your introduction. Your next statement is going to summarize the first section. You can look at that section heading that you've given it and write the kind of the summary of what you discovered. You're not going to be putting names of studies in this abstract. There should be no quotes in this abstract. There should be no citations. This should just simply be in your own words, a summary of what you wrote. So, third sentence, again, section, you're going to summarize section 2. Section 3 gets summarized, and then your conclusion gets summarized. Okay, so once you're done with your roughly 5 sentence abstract, most people's are going to be about 5 sentences long, you're going to do a keywords line so that if some people were looking for your literature review, what keywords would help them find your literature review. So what are the kind of main terms in your paper? Note that it's indented and that keywords is italicized. There's a colon, and then you list your 3 or 4 or 5 keywords. I wouldn't put more than 5. All right. So then, just as with your title page, you're going to come up and you're going to insert your page break. And your first page of your paper for every single person should be page 3. All right. So your introduction, let me make this a teeny bit smaller so we can see better. All right, this is better. So your introduction is going to have not going to have the title, not going to have the word introduction as its header. It's going to have the title of your paper just as it was presented on your title page. You will reproduce that title in the center bolded. Okay, so you can see I have a note here telling you that. And note too that unlike your abstract, you're going to use paragraph indentions, standard paragraph indentions. So the purpose of the introduction is to explain first of all, tell me, why was this research compelling? What made it interesting? Maybe what has changed? Because remember, you're doing a literature review of research that's roughly a 5-year span. So you could note that in your introduction. What, what has been noted of importance in the past 5 years since 2020? So the introduction is there to tell me it's not like a hook like you do in a standard research paper, because you're not trying to convince me of anything exactly. You're trying to inform me. So anything you need to do to set me up to understand the sections of your paper works in this introduction. And you notice that if I use acronyms, then you want to, first time you use them, you want to write them out with the acronym in parentheses. And then you conclude your introduction with your thesis statement, or again, sometimes it's called a purpose statement when you're writing a paper like this, because you're telling me the purpose of your paper. It's very overt. Then you launch into the first section of your paper. This is the first sort of research trend that you've noticed. What stood out to you? So I have a student in my seated 112 class who's looking at anemia in the population of women starting from their teenage years all the way to their past middle age into their older years. And that student is arranging the paper in terms of demographics, age, because that's what she noticed kind of kept coming out. Is that some papers were talking about teenagers, some were talking about women of childbearing ages, and there was overlap. But so that was her particular arrangement. I have a student who is writing about teacher burnout, and really looked at the three main reasons that kept coming up for teacher burnout. And those were the three categories. And what that student found was that some of the studies he had um, looked at, none of them looked at all three of his categories, but they did overlap and look at two kind of spread across the five studies that he looked at. So this is going to be your first category. In my case, I am looking at social skills development and pro-social behavior in terms of the impact of pets, pet ownership for people with autism spectrum disorder. This was the first thing that I noticed. So, one more thing, let me back up. Your thesis statement needs to name your three categories in the order that you're going to present them. So in that sense, it's just like your 111 research paper. Okay. So once you have your category, you're going to spend your first two sentences or three sentences explaining that research trend. What did you notice? Tell me about that. Tell me about social skills development and pro-social behavior. What is it? Um, so you want to do a little bit of explanation before you launch into your first study. So once I've done that, then I launch into my first study. I write Carlisle 2015 conducted a telephone survey of 70 parents of children with autism spectrum disorder and found that children who own dogs demonstrated higher social skills. So this is one of the findings. And then I say, why is it notable? And then I synthesize. Okay, so you can see I don't change paragraphs, but I say, hey, um, supporting these findings. So also similar to Carlisle 2015, any one of those signal phrases that shows connection, you're going to show how these studies are alike and how they're different with respect to this topic. That is your job in this paper. How are your studies similar in the way they treat this topic, and how are they different? You don't need to give lots and lots and lots of data, because your job is to just present the overview. Your job is not to convince me of something. You're showing me the relationship. You're saying, hey, look, these two studies had a similar way of dealing with social skills development and pro-social behavior for people with autism spectrum disorder who own pets. Okay. And then I offer up my third particular study that also looks at the similar category in terms of, hey, look, it went beyond just children who own pets, because that's what these were talking about. It also found that it helped adults. Owning pets helped adults with autism. And so I add on to that. Now, here's my table. I included a table to support this. I found a table that showed the correlation between mental health measures and pet relationship measures within the participants of this study. So I said to myself, hey, that looks like a good way of showing this information. For you as a student, the purpose of including a table is to get practice doing it. Remembering that all of these English classes you do in your freshman level are there to give you skills for your later classes. I would be remiss if I didn't make you include a table because you will have to do that. If I know one of our biology instructors, both the instructor of the lecture and the lab make their students write papers. So this is an important aspect. So you're going to include your table. You're going to have your sentence that signals to me, the reader, about your table or your graphic or your figure. You're going to call it whatever. And it should be, since you're only going to have one, you're going to have to rename that particular figure that you include because it's probably going to have a higher number. Most of those studies that you've looked at have multiple graphics. So you're going to want to rename it to table one or graph one or figure one, whatever. Okay. And you note that I say, hey, look, see table one below. So I tell the reader where it's located in my paper. Try to put it near the section that you're talking about. Okay. And what I did, just as a little information on how I actually included it, is I just did a screenshot. I think that's the easiest. And so I screenshotted this. I cut off, I edited out the title that was in the original because I needed to change it. And then I retyped this information. Okay, you can just retype whatever it's originally called. You can call it the same thing, but you're probably going to have to re-enter that type. And so you'll call it table one or graph or figure one. That should go on the margin. It should be bolded. Just below it, you're going to describe it, give it its title, and it should be italicized. And all of this is still your Times New Roman 12 font. Then you're going to include your graphic. Again, it'll be basically left justified. And then just below it, you've got to give your bibliographic note. And what I'm going to tell you to do, so I don't have to go through every single bit, basically follow what I have here. You've got the title of your paper in italics, or the title of your article, it's in italics. Um, then you include the by, then you name your authors, okay? But you note that I haven't inverted them like I do on my bibliography. This is a note. So you note it's just different, okay? And then include the journal it comes from, italicized, volume italicized, issue in parentheses, page it came from, and then in parentheses, you're going to include its DOI and then the copyright. Now, you can usually find the copyright at the beginning of your article, at the end, and it's usually the same date as the publication date. All right, so that is your table. Super easy. Note the font is a small font. In fact, it's Calibri 10-point font. All right, so that is your table. And then after you have gone through in this section and discussed your various studies, be sure to spend some time talking generally, synthesizing all of that stuff. So you're going to go back and remind me, hey, here's basically what this research, all three studies discovered. All right. So then you're going to do the same thing with section 2. Okay, you can go through, I won't go through each section like I did the first one. Here's your synthesis paragraph. Then you're going to have your third section. Then finally, you're going to come to your conclusion, and it will have its own title. It'll be, or own header. It'll be called conclusion, bolded, centered. These are level 1 headings, by the way. I will look at that announcement and just discuss what a level 2 heading, why someone might use one, and how they look. But let's get through this paper. So the big thing in the conclusion is saying to the reader, "Hey, reader, here's what you need to think about what might be studied next. If you were a student getting ready to launch into a research study, this is where you would basically tell me where you're going to start to do your new research." Okay. Then hit insert page break, drop down your references, and you note them on page 8 at this point. So that should be pretty standard because you know, you've got these sections. Each one should be 2 to 3 paragraphs. You got your graph, you got your abstract, you got your title page. So your references should be on page 8 or 9. References, centered, bolded, level 1 heading. Uh, these are going to be alphabetized. And go and read what I wrote on your annotated bibliography. Do not reproduce the same mistakes. Okay. A lot of the mistakes I saw had to do with leaving off the ampersand. And it always goes before the last author's name. And note that all up to 20 names get listed on the actual reference page. And the ampersand goes before the last name listed. So it'll be name, comma, name, comma, name, comma, ampersand, and last name. And then remember the date directly after. Another problem I saw was not using sentence caps for the article title. Article titles on the reference page for APA use sentence capitalization case, and there are no quotation marks. Journal titles and volume numbers use title capitalization, and they are italicized. No quotation. So no quotation marks at all on this reference page unless there happens to be some in the title of your article. Okay? And make sure you've got your DOI number. And that's it. Let's see. Let me go ahead and go back to our announcement. If I go back, so again, here's your overview. This is what all the stuff you need to know in one place. This is the required order of sections. If we go back to Monday's memo, I remind you for the elements of things like, say, the ampersand versus the word and what it should look like in different sections of your paper. You can go through and check that out. Okay, so if all this information here, publication date always stays with the author. Page numbers are required for direct quotes, optional for paraphrase, but if it's like a long paraphrase or like of a big section, you can put it. It's probably better. Some of you want to use level 2 headings if you have very long sections with lots of information within each section. You may want to break it up. If you want to know how the different level headings look for APA and how they're used, I include this informational guide by APA. You should look at this. It gives you all of the level headings and how you would use them for APA. This is a level 1 heading, level 2 heading, There are level 3 headings, so if you think you have so much information that it's hard to organize, read this handout and try to follow along. Again, here's some in-text reference help. How is this going to look in the paper? You're correctly citing books, correctly citing journals. So I have a lot of information in Monday's announcement, so you don't have to start digging for it. All right, I hope that helps, and be sure to be working on your peer review.